Welcome to my shop and welcome to my series of videos on the basic and safe use of the various tools that make up a wood shop. In this video we're going to cover this saw. This is a compound miter saw. I'm going to go over the basic cuts that you would make with this type of a saw, the adjustments that you can make when working with it, and of course the way to do it all safely. I use this saw all of the time. In fact, I use it so much that I have 3 of them in my shop right now. This is the one that you'll see me use the most often when I'm working in the wood shop. The other 2 I can bring to job sites. And this one is put into this setup here where I have quite a lot of support on both sides of it from the cabinets that have been designed specifically to work with this saw. Whether you have a setup like this or not, the tips that I'm going to show you here will help you to operate your saw in a safe manner and to get the most out of it. So let's talk about the things that you can adjust when you're making cuts with a saw like this. And now you need to keep in mind that there are so many of these saws that the features really do vary from saw to saw. For instance, my saw has a sliding mechanism on it, which means that I can do longer cuts. Some saws don't have that mechanism, and then you're limited to the diameter of the blade. But that is the basic cut, one that is just a simple 90-degree cut against the wood that you're working with. Let me show you how to do that safely. So here's the most common cut that you want to do. Let's say that I've made this mark here with this crow's foot mark, and I want to cut off the material so that I'm keeping this side of the board, and this is just waste for me. When we're making our cut, we need to keep in mind that there is a curve to the blade. So the first thing that I do is I bring the flat edge of the board up against my fence here in the back, and then without turning the power on, I bring the blade down to my mark. Since I'm going to waste this side, it's the left side of my blade that matches with the mark. Now that the board is there, I hold it in place firmly up against the fence so that the pressure of the blade is coming in towards the fence, pushing the board towards the fence. Almost every tool like this will come also with a guard like this one. Now the Festool one is actually quite easy to work with. It just has this lever here. You push the guard into place and you push the lever down, and now this board is very firmly held. I don't actually have to touch this board anymore while I make this cut. Your saw almost certainly came with one of these, but whether it's there or not is another question because a lot of woodworkers don't use them. If it is there and you're new, it's a good idea to use it, and it is an essential idea if the piece that you're working with is a lot smaller and harder to hold. Let's go ahead and cut this one. The way that you approach this cut depends on the material that you're cutting. This board is 3/4 of an inch thick, and it's not very wide, so I can just do a straight cut down. And there is no reason to rush here. The most common feedback that I give to younger people who use the shop is just to slow down. The second piece that I'm cutting through is also 3/4 of an inch, but it's much wider. And so I have to bring the handle all the way back, plunge down, and slowly push away from me to cut the board. That's the safest way to do it. Do not try and pull the blade towards you while it's running. Now I want to cover a couple of safety things when it comes to the cuts that you make. The first is that if a board starts to get too small, it starts to get very dangerous. The biggest safety issue that you can have, other than, of course, putting a finger in the path of the blade, is that the piece that you're cutting will get caught by the blade and make a pivot inside of there very quickly and toss the material out. The smaller that your cut gets, the harder it is to control by hand, and the more temptation you're going to have your fingers closer to the blade. In general, you don't want your fingers closer than this blade guard here. There are some ways to get around that. For instance, if you have a way of clamping it down, like with this tool or other clamps, then you can keep your fingers away, then great. Another is to use a paddle like this, which you can hold at an angle and put quite a lot of friction on, and will protect you if it does slip out, and you can make your cut. But in general, it might be better to use a different kind of saw when making a cut on very small material. The biggest consideration when making a cut on small material is that you want to make sure at least half of that material is being protected by the back fence. Way too much temptation to slip otherwise. An absolute safety problem is to think that you might be able to make an angled cut like this down the blade without holding the board itself against the fence. Do not try to attempt this. Even if you don't have a blade that adjusts to make an angle, if you try and do this and it slips away from you because the blade is pushing it back, it's going to pivot into the blade and throw that material. And believe me, you don't need a blade to cut your hand up. A board can do it just fine when it's at speed. I brought this board over to my assembly table in order to illustrate one of the common safety problems that you may run into when you're making cuts on your compound miter saw. Now this is a hardwood, this is maple, and it's a little over an inch thick. But the important part is that it actually has a cup to it. It might be hard to see on the video here, but here in the center it's sticking up a bit and being supported by the two ends. Now let me describe what happens when you cut a piece of material like this. Let's say you were to try and cut it straight down with your compound miter. What will happen is that as you take material out with your cut and get a little bit further down, because it has that cup in there, it's no longer being supported with that cup on the sides. It now wants to have this end drop down to be touching as well, which means that the cut that you've made is going to be pinched on the upper parts of the board as this part sinks down. So there's a way to deal with that. And let me say that this is a problem that doesn't just happen with hardwood like this. The most common time I see it is when I'm cutting 2x4s because they warp so hard. Normally you want to cut straight through a softwood like that, but you can't do that if it's got a good cup to it. What you want to do when you're making that cut is to go in shallow passes so that you're cutting out only a portion of the material at a time. But also you want to lift your blade back out of your cut and bring it back down again when you make the next pass. That allows the wood to settle down and not be supported by the blade that's in the cut already. And you're going to, in your second pass, actually be taking a little bit more material off the top of your first pass. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me just show you how it's done over on a cut on a board like this. There are quite a few ways that you can make adjustments to the cut that you're doing on a saw like this. And because there's so many of these saws, you may have to consult the documentation and references for that particular saw. The most common adjustment that you'll make to the saw is to set your miter angle. And that is to move your saw to one angle or another in order to make a miter cut. Now most saws have locking mechanisms on them. This one you push down. They also have ways of snapping into place to common angles such as 45 or 22.5. So what are the safety implications of working with a mitered cut? Well, the most obvious one, of course, is that now that this blade is coming at an angle, you have less room to put your hand in. In fact, if you're oriented here where the normal cut might be, your entire arm is now in the path of the blade. That's why Festool has put this convenient marking here saying don't put your hand here. The best way to deal with that, of course, is to use your clamp, which is always going to be out of the way. The next most common adjustment is for you to actually set the miter direction this way. And one thing to keep in mind is that in several cases, your fence may end up in the way of your blade. So you want to test it first without the blade spinning to make sure that you're clearing your fence. Almost all of these have adjustments on them so that the fence can slide in and out to make sure that you've got the coverage that you need. Then when you return it back to its upright position, you'll want to adjust your fence back again so that you're getting all of the coverage there. Now some saws only adjust in one direction. Mine will adjust in both. So let me set it to a 30-degree cut right there. And once again, I'll use my clamp to hold it in place while I make this cut. The final adjustment that my saw offers, which is actually somewhat uncommon on saws, is that it has a stop block to it as well. So using this lever right here, I can make sure that the bottom of the blade stays up above a certain amount, so I could cut like a kind of dado. And the reason it's called a compound miter saw is because you can combine these miters. You can set a distance over this way as well as one this way. And again, check your fence when you do that kind of cut. That's a compound miter, and it's common in doing crown molding, for instance. There you go. That is the basic and safe use, I hope, of the compound miter saw. It's a very versatile tool, and it's one of the most common ones to be seen both inside of the wood shop and out at job sites. I hope that you find great ways to make this a useful tool for the projects that you create. And if you found this video helpful in learning about this particular tool, I hope you take a look at some of the other videos that I'm doing in this series about the basic and safe use of the tools inside of the wood shop. Until then, enjoy making sawdust and creating things that I can't even imagine. I hope I'll see you in another video soon.